We are diving deep now into all things New Hampshire primary.
We're joined by Reid Wilson. He's correspondent for The Hill. He's a true expert whenever it comes to these elections.
Indeed.
Reid, tell us about the state of New Hampshire. It's a rural state, but it has a few major populated areas. Of course, we've got Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, kind of the hometown senators, sharing media markets and affinity and all of that. What are the things that people need to be looking for as I think as ahead of New Hampshire as they start voting within the next week or two?
So there are sort of four major population centers around the state. You've got Manchester, the largest city by far, Nashua, just just down the road from there, and then Concord up north, which is a pretty small state capital. And then the border communities on the southern part of the state, which is why the state has become a contested state in a general election. A bunch of people from Massachusetts, business people particularly, who move up to New Hampshire for the lower taxes, but they can still commute into Boston. So they're a weird mix of like the suburban people who may be moving away from President Trump, but also much more likely to vote for, say, Mitt Romney or something like that in 2012. The interesting thing about New Hampshire historically is that we talk about gerrymandering a lot in terms of race and how African American voters have been suppressed in a lot of states and either packed into one district or cracked between districts. In New Hampshire, it's a story about religion. And Nashua and Manchester, for the longest time, have been in different congressional districts because they're both Catholic hubs. And for a long time, the Protestants who ran the state government didn't want to give Catholics their own seat in Congress. So historical reason for why those two cities are separate.
Okay. So interesting.
That's what we see.
That is
now,
fascinating.
the first vote that is going to come out of New Hampshire is going to come in a very tiny town. It's not even a town, called Dixville Notch. And the people of Dixville Notch, all five of them, literally five, will show up at midnight on the day of the primary, cast their votes very publicly, then they'll be read. Dixville Notch is about 7 hours north of Manchester, so I don't think I'm going to drive up there that night. But it is a fascinating tradition, and this year it was at risk. The town was down to 4 residents, and by state law, a town can't have its own polling place unless they have 5. So the guy who owns the big resort there moved from Maine to be the 5th voter, and the Dixville Notch tradition will continue.
Thank you to that, good sir. Is it predictive? Is it normally predictive or not? It's not. No, it's just fun.
Yes and no. Like Obama won it in 16, I can't remember who in 12 or 2008. I mean, I can't remember who won it in 16. But
all right, we won't rely too much on that as an indicator. Then
it's a really nice, fun New England tradition, right?
One of the things people always talk about with New Hampshire is that it is an open primary, so independents can vote. That vote tends to be very important. I mean, how critical has independent support been to past candidates who have won the state?
Well, it's been huge for 2 candidates in particular. To John McCain back in 2000, who drew a whole bunch of independent votes when he ended up beating George W. Bush in that primary, and then Barack Obama in 2008, probably to John McCain's detriment, by the way, even though he won that primary too. But Obama was the one in 2008 who was drawing a lot of independent voters, even though Hillary Clinton ended up winning the state by just the tiniest of margin. Well, no, actually, she won it by a decent margin. But anyway, the independent voters were probably streaming into the Democratic primary too. This time around, the independent voters are going to favor some Democratic candidate because obviously there's not really a contest on the Republican side. Who's that candidate going to be? It's not clear. Michael Bennet has been spending a lot of time in the state. I have a hard time seeing him really breaking out in terms of this field. Is it going to benefit? Is it going to benefit a moderate like Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg? That's possible, although neither of them have really spent a lot of their resources in the state. I think both of them are sort of looking farther down the road. It does feel like a home field battle between the 2 neighboring state senators, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. And funny enough, their favorability ratings in New Hampshire are just about identical, and Sanders is outpolling Warren 2-1.
That is wild. But, Buttigieg is also doing very well in New Hampshire. What's behind that phenomenon? He hasn't spent that much time there, actually.
He spent time there. I couldn't go back. I can go back and look at the ad spending, but I don't know, small town mayor, bunch of small towns in New Hampshire. It's sort of a small town feel, but it's historically speaking, it is a state that tends to vote against whatever Iowa has voted. They don't like to say, they don't ratify what Iowa does. They go their own way. This time around, Bernie Sanders is leading. He's leading in Iowa too. maybe a 1-2 punch there. No nominee in modern history or no candidate in modern history has won the first 2 contests and then lost the nomination.
Yeah.
So maybe some alarm bells if anti-Sanders folks see that happen.
There's some indications, too, as you were sort of alluding to, that Biden is not particularly playing in New Hampshire. He's been dark on the airwaves there since the new year up until very, very recently, scaled back on staff. He seems to have this strategy of, the South Carolina firewall. How has that kind of approach to primaries worked out for candidates in the past?
Well, it has not worked out great for the last several candidates who have tried it because they always keep retrenching and they never get their first win.
Yeah.
So if Joe Biden gets his first win in Nevada or South Carolina, well, then fine. He's off to the races. He's a part of the conversation. But the candidate who sticks out to me the most is Rudy Giuliani in 2008.
Right.
When he pulled out of Iowa. He never really contested Iowa. I remember him showing up in Iowa in a 3-piece suit in a line of 3 Suburbans and thinking, it's not really Iowa. Anyway, so he retrenched to New Hampshire, then he retrenched to South Carolina, then he retrenched to Florida, then he retrenched to California, and by that point, the race was pretty much over. Where do you get your first win? There's a pretty clear path to Joe Biden getting his first win in South Carolina, and then there are a number of southern states with huge minority populations. He does great among non-white voters. If those states end up giving him a big boost on Super Tuesday, then he could be the front runner.
I think that could work out for him as long as it's not the same candidate who wins both Iowa and New Hampshire. Because as you pointed out, if one person wins Iowa and New Hampshire, it gets pretty tough.
Look, but here's the problem when we talk about these historical trends, and I will be the first to admit, we have a very small sample size that we're looking at. I mean, the modern presidential politics has only existed in
years,
this. Since
anything could happen, and they've never had a guy willing to spend unlimited money and go all the way to the end. So there you go. Thank you,
All right, Reid, thank you so much. Great to have you. And we'll have more Rising for you after this.